hey, I think I did something right. Well, thank you all who are here. I'd like to introduce James LaVeck. He is an author, grief expert, and transitional coach whose journey began with his memoir, Life After Losses. He's lost two husbands over 2 decades. He's a blogger on grief and recovery, and he has agreed to talk to me today. So, is there anything
Another
you'd like to
conversation.
add? I just kind of.
No, no, not really. You mentioned the basics, unless
So,
anybody has any questions, right?
and so, yeah, if there's any questions, either unmute or put them in the chat. That'd be great. I do have a few questions that I had somebody ask me. One was how do you deal with grief when it pops up at the most inconvenient time?
Triggers.
Yes,
Yes, the triggers.
triggers.
Um, I remember several times crying in the grocery aisles.
That was one
Um,
of the examples I said.
yeah, I just let it happen. I mean, yeah, you realize you're as you're shopping for something and you realize, oh wait, I'm shopping for one. Or you see, in my case, it was a specific beer that we used to buy at Trader Joe's. And I'd go to Trader Joe's and I'd see that beer on the shelf and I just broke down crying. Um, Somebody asked me, what if I was okay? I'm like, no, not really, but thank you. I appreciate that. Um, the biggest thing I find with triggers, and I've kind of classified them into three different kinds. There's the anticipated ones that you can see on a calendar. You know these are coming up. Holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, those special days that you can plan ahead of time how you want to react to those, whether it goes according to plan or not. Um, but you at least have some control over those. You can say on that day I want to stay in bed and bury myself in the covers all day. That's fine. That's a valid response. Or I want to, in my instance, the one that really didn't go well as planned is I wanted to release a balloon on the anniversary date and tied a note to it. And I let it go and it got caught in trees.
Oh
And
no.
then I went and got new balloons and those got caught in a tree. And I was beside myself, but I was determined to do to do something. But that was something where I planned what I wanted to do and how I wanted to experience that day. I do that with anniversaries and birthdays. Like tomorrow's my 26th anniversary
Oh,
of the day we met. So I have something planned for tomorrow. So those ones are easier for me, I think, to work on. And then there's the anticipated triggers, right? If I'm watching Grey's Anatomy or I'm watching something and I know reasonably to expect that something is going to trigger me. We know a character's going to die or something like that. I watch those and I can kind of prepare and say, all right, well, I know that this is going to happen. I have a pretty good feeling that I'm going to cry or I'm going to feel really lousy, and that's okay. So I give myself permission to feel what I feel. That third category where it's just totally unexpected, I still haven't quite figured out how to cope with that other than just to acknowledge the emotion.
so that's usually what I have. I just acknowledge it, try to live with it, and
And sometimes,
live.
like if there's a song, like we had a song or whatever, and it played on the radio, and it would make me cry. I would just think of it as a sign. So I would ascribe some meaning to it, whether it's whether there is a sign or not. To me, that was a sign. Uh, to have hummingbirds in my yard was a sign. Those kinds of things. So definitely, I always, at least when it comes to emotions, I've learned to stop judging them and to let them just be. Acknowledge that they're there and say, yes, I see you. I will give you your as much space as you need, but eventually I'm going to take back my life. If
And
that makes sense.
give yourself grace.
Yes.
And don't, who gives a shit what everybody else thinks?
That's absolutely. I think I it's either a blog post or another post that I did on social media is that um it's basically actually I think it was yesterday's social media post about talking about your loved one, and if people are uncomfortable, too bad, that's their problem. It's not your problem that they're uncomfortable. If you want to talk about your loved one, talk about your loved one. Find an audience that will listen because we're out here. We will listen. We'll give you support. We'll do all that kind of stuff.
I think that's the biggest thing is everybody thinks they're not allowed to talk about grief.
And I'm really happy that you reached out and said, let's talk about grief because I think it's really important. We all go through a loss of something at some point in our lives, whether it's a pet, a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, spouse, marriage, parents,
Children
siblings,
moving out.
children moving out. And we all have a loss that we need to learn to cope with. And if we push those feelings down, they fester. That's not healthy.
No,
We need to be able to have an open conversation about these things, so that we can say, this is what something that worked for me. Maybe it can work for you, or let's see if we can find a solution that makes your life a little easier to cope with that loss.
let's come up with strategies to get you living again.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's not get stuck in the grief and the sorrow of whatever it is you're dealing
Yeah, and yeah, I've said, well, yeah, this is a new audience, so they don't know what I've said before.
with.
Um, but I don't know. We may have some people from my followers. Um, but yeah, the first 2 years after my first loss, I mean, I was 27-ish, almost 28 at the time of that loss. I didn't know about grieving, especially losing my soulmate. Um, I didn't know what I needed, what I didn't know, and I didn't know what I needed to do to cope with it. So I went through the motions. I went through a support group. It was helpful. I credit them for keeping me alive. But I spent 2 years just focused on feeding my grief monster, and I didn't care if I lived or died. In fact, I slowly tried to kill myself by drinking too much, smoking too much, just being reckless with life. Because it didn't matter to me anymore. I had no purpose. I had no life left. And it was about 2 years. And there were a couple of things that happened around that time. I had a dream where I felt him come to me and say, it's time to go, but I didn't hear him say that. But when I woke up from that dream, I felt lighter. I felt like some burden had been lifted off of me. Um, and that was around the time that we spread his ashes at a place that he loved in California. Uh, and I call this my enough moment. I'd had enough living in despair, and I made massive changes. I quit my job. I started working for a consulting company and started traveling, and just completely changed everything about how I was living my life. Um, Massive change is usually not a very good thing for a lot of people that require incremental changes. But this was something I needed to change the narrative of where I was living.
I think
And
the biggest,
that's what I did for me.
well, and I think the biggest stereotype is everybody is how am I supposed to grieve? There is no supposed to. You do what's best for you. And if that's a drastic change, then you drastically change.
Yeah. Yeah. What's normal? Oh, well, within 6 months, you should be able to do this. Within a year, you should be able to do that. Statistically, sure. Okay. Most people are going to be at a certain point in time, but it is all
Statistics are science. Grief is emotion.
exactly. I mean, that's not emotions. That's not my lived experience. I mean, like I said, that first loss, it took me over 2 years to even start dating again. A friend of mine started dating 6 weeks after his wife died and married a few months after that. So that doesn't tell me anything about the love that he had for his wife because I know that he still loves her.
Yeah,
And
that doesn't go away.
it's been 20 years or whatever since that. So that was another piece of advice that I had shared in my first book was don't compare your grief journey with anybody else's. You can take inspiration from other people on what worked for them and how you can heal. For me, it was writing in a journal, and taking music and putting that together and making um, cassette tapes that kind of shared what my journey was through the music of other artists. So that was my path. I also, like I said, drank and smoked a lot. Um, that I don't recommend that path. The first time I pushed people away. The second time I pulled them in because I didn't because I learned from the first one.
Yeah.
It's a very hard road to walk as as a widower or somebody who's lost a significant part of their life. And doing that alone is really difficult. Um, and so I suggest to people to surround themselves with their friends and family, the people who want to help, but they don't know how to help. It's up to us, I think, as somebody who's supporting somebody who's grieving, just say, let me make you a meal. Don't say, if there's
What
anything
can
you
I
need,
do for
let me
you?
know.
Yeah.
If there, yeah, because you're bereaved and your brain isn't working. I mean, we have widow brain, widow fog, and you're just going through the motions those first several weeks. You don't have,
I
I
I had
couldn't
a
tell you
friend.
what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I had a friend who it was her nephew passed, and she's a server. And
Mm,
so, every day it's different. So instead of food or this, I paid her water bill so she could take another day off and deal with her grief.
yeah, it's that kind of being specific and offering a specific kind of help. After my second husband died, the community created this meal train, and there's a website that they'd use to coordinate that. I think it was called Meal Train, actually, where they put a cooler on my front porch, and every night, magically, there was food in it. I'd never had to answer a door. I never had to talk to anybody. And I'm not kidding when I say for at least 2.5 months, I did not have to cook a meal
Oh, wow.
because the community was continually bringing me and my kids food and meals, um, to allow us the space that we needed to process the grief and to go through things and just to be in the moment and not have to be pulled out to do mundane tasks.
Well, and that's what I wonder. Instead of somebody dying, like how, what ideas would you have to support someone who's dealing with grief, but it's not death? Like they just got a cancer diagnosis. So you're going to grieve your what you thought life was going to be.
I would probably do the same kind of thing. Talk about it, acknowledge the emotions, work on the emotions. Um, a cancer diagnosis doesn't necessarily need to be terminal,
Correct. But your life does look different.
but your life is definitely changing.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, our life changes from day to day anyway. There, and so the living of the life is in between those huge moments to me. Um, I'm not the same person I was 30 years ago.
I don't think I'm the same person I was 2 days ago.
Or that. Um, yeah, I
Sometimes,
mean,
sometimes it's that quick.
but I guess with somebody who is facing a diagnosis like that, the biggest thing that I would suggest is to just support them. I don't necessarily, I spent most of my life dealing with the grieving and the that kind of support. But yeah, the I think the important thing is just to be there to listen and offer to not offer to solve the problem because you can't, but to be there to listen and support their needs.
Just be the soundboard.
Yeah, it's just having somebody in your corner who understands and who's willing to listen. I think is very important.
That is important. And like I said, a lot of that is you got to find the right person too.
That you do, and that in itself can be a challenge. Um, I when my first husband was diagnosed, we went to a cancer cancer support group, and found people there who understood what we were going through. And it's not just the person who's diagnosed that is having to go through something. It's the person who's taking care of that person who's diagnosed as well.
The
Um,
caregiver deals with a lot.
yeah, and
Nobody realizes how much the caregiver goes through just as much as the patient does.
and it's different levels of support,
Yes.
right? So understanding that dynamic exists and that those people on both sides require some support is very important, I think.
As I said, a lot of times, even with my being a hospice nurse, a lot of people, what do I do? That's the question I always get from caregivers. What do I do? And I tell them, I said, as much as it sounds mean, I feel like, but it's like life doesn't stop just because this is happening. You have to find a new way to live.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, my first was we did hospice for probably 2 or 3 weeks now. I can't even remember anymore the exact amount of time, but we put a hospital bed downstairs, and I moved the trundle bed downstairs, so I was at least close by. Um, and that was the nurses that did that were absolutely amazing people, um, because they made me feel like I was as important as he was
Mhm.
in supporting me and being able to support him. But at the same time, I was also a cocky 28-year-old who thought I didn't need any help, right?
Mhm.
But perspective, introspection, they were absolutely there to help me as much as they were there to help him.
And I think that's another misconception on hospice. Everything, we're just about the patient, but we're not. We're honestly about the entire family.
Yeah, and I imagine you have had multiple cases where you've had to work with various illnesses and how do you how do you as a caregiver of caregivers manage to take care of yourself?
Well, being a nurse, I'm not very good at
Okay.
that. I am learning the older I get, self-care is definitely a big thing. I have to set boundaries with my families. As much as hard as it is to say this is work, this is personal. You have to keep a line to keep it separated as much as possible.
Well, and it's like that, when you get on an airplane, they give you the pre-flight safety briefing, right?
Yes.
Put your mask on before you try to put anybody else's on, which sounds completely counterintuitive if you're a parent, right? My
Mhm.
first response would be put the mask on my kid, but if I pass out because there's no oxygen, I can't put the mask on my kid. So that's how I liken self-care. If I don't take care of me, I can't take care of anybody else.
And I love that. I had a friend, me and her talked, and she said her son actually looked at her and said, Mom, who do you love more, me or you? And she said she thought about it and she looked at him. She says, Well, I love me more. And of course, as a kid, he's like, Are you kidding? And she
You
said, No,
would.
yeah. Why would you love you more? And she said, That's the thing. I have to love myself before I can love others. So the more I love myself, the more abundance I have, and it can pour over into other people.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to learn that. I'm not perfect, for
Well,
sure.
and the annoying thing is that our society feels like it puts a lot more negativity on self-care, calling it selfish.
Yeah.
Instead, and I don't like in self-care as being selfish. Again, to that point, if I don't take care of me, I can't take care of anybody else. If I don't love me, how the hell are you going to love anybody else, as RuPaul says?
And that's what I have to bring up to families a lot. I was like, you can't not eat, you can't not sleep, and you can't not deal with your grief
And they'll continue doing that.
until somebody tells them
And
it's okay.
yeah,
That's me. I was like, if nothing else, I want to let everybody know it's okay to feel what you feel. There is no right or
absolutely.
wrong way. And like you said,
But
reach out. There are people that can help.
yeah, I mean, emotions are inherently neutral,
Mhm.
right? Fear, for example. Fear keeps us safe, but it can also stop us from moving forward. It's the context of how we use those emotions. And for me, if it's an emotion that is just not preventing me, or it is preventing me from moving forward in any aspect of my life, then I need to address it.
Yeah.
But in and of itself, sadness, grief, those are normal reactions. That despair that I had for 2 years before I hit that enough moment, that was something I had to address. But I wasn't equipped at the time to address it.
And everybody has a different level of enough.
Exactly.
You just have to find your level. So what prompted you to write your books?
Uh, so actually started writing it the year before COVID. Actually, I started writing it in 1997, 2 years after I lost the first one, which was basic, and it was basically just a retelling of what I had written in my journal. Uh, and it sat on my computer in a hard drive for years. After my second loss, I thought this could be a story that might resonate with people. Uh, so I started writing it kind of more as therapy for myself and trying to make sense of the two losses in my life that impacted how I continued living. And in doing so, I came to the realization that I needed the first loss to help me cope with the second loss. And I needed the second loss to put the first one in perspective because I'd spent 20 some odd years wondering why did that happen? Why? I had faith back then. Why? I was, and it just didn't, I couldn't make sense of the why. And it was after the second loss that I realized, or at least the meaning I gave it. I needed that because I had to go through this a second time, this time modeling grieving behavior to my children and letting them know it's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry at the person who died.
Mhm.
It's okay that you're angry with me because I don't know how to shop for school supplies. And that's a real story. Daddy Bob did it better. That's fine. He was, yeah, whatever.
He
But
was just better, okay?
he was better. And I'm like, yeah, but he's not here. I'm the one that I have to do it now. And we've got to do it my way because I don't know his way. Um, but I had to be able to help them put things in perspective. You know, uh, one of the earlier questions I got, well, we were going to go to family week. Can we still go? Well, why wouldn't we? Are we still a family?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're family now with a single parent. But there's all kinds of families out there. Some have no parents and they have their aunts and uncles taking care of them or their grandparents or and so it led to a lot of those important conversations, I think, with them so that they were able to learn to process the loss in a way that made sense to them. So I didn't hide the fact that I was crying. I still don't. I'll watch a movie and I'll sit there wiping tears off my face, and my daughter's like, "Are you crying?" No.
Allergies.
It's dusty in here. Gosh, you guys are messy. But it, it's it was necessary for me, I think, to for them to have the experience that I didn't have as a young person, to understand how loss is processed and how you can still live with the grief and you can still have those emotions and still live and still get things done. I didn't have that opportunity as a kid. Thankfully, hopefully, because I didn't have that loss, um, because I don't know that my mother at the time would have been able uh, to help me cope with a loss at that hour, at that time, or anybody else, because we didn't talk about it then. We don't talk about it much now either, but I try to force a conversation wherever I can on trying to live your life with the grief, not for the grief.
It's funny you bring up the kids. That's another question I always get. It's, well, what do we tell little Johnny who's only 7? And my suggestion always is tell them the truth.
Yeah,
Tell them what's going on, but give them the choice if they want to go to the funeral or not. Don't make them go, but don't hide from them what's happening.
right. They didn't go to sleep.
No, because then you're
Uh,
going to be afraid to sleep.
yeah, right. Um, and one of the things that after on that day that we found my husband, the chaplain from the fire department was there, and he said, "Well, you need to tell your kids." And I'm like, "What the heck do I tell my kids?" Exactly to that point. And he's like, "Stay away from euphemisms. He died. He's not coming back. They need to be able to process that he's dead. He's not. He didn't go to visit. He didn't go to. He didn't go to heaven because then they think that he might come back, or
Mhm.
he's not. He's not sleeping, or stuff like that, and be very honest but age appropriate,
Yes.
and so that they can process that grief."
Because, I mean, in the end, none of us are getting out alive. So they're going to have to deal with it at some point in time or another.
That's true. And I went a lot of years. I mean, I lost my grandparents, but they were either in Germany or on the other side of the country, and I didn't really have a relationship with them. So it was hard to really feel anything because I didn't have that connection.
Know that well.
Right.
You knew who
Uh,
they were, but you
I
didn't.
knew who they were. I met my grandparents from Germany once when I was 5, and they passed away 20 years after that. So, yeah, I didn't have that real deep bond with them. I knew who they were, but we didn't have Sunday dinners together to get together. So those kind of losses for me were, I don't want to say easier, but they were easier. They weren't as complicated as somebody I'd spent 7 years with day in, day out, um, building a relationship and building a future together.
I'll open it up at the moment. Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask? Or not? That's okay too.
Or you can drop it
Or
or
not.
drop it in the chat. Anything or if you have anything to add.
Yes, Anne.
Yeah, I don't really have any questions. I certainly agree with everything that's been said. I mean, it's so true. There is no formula that applies to everyone and how we deal with grief. And I think, yeah, as far as, working with in my younger years, I always felt like, oh, I'm almost afraid to talk to that person, that's lost someone. I mean, what can I say? Like there is nothing you can say. I can appreciate that now, but just being present, and letting them know that you care and you see that they're hurting. Um, yeah,
If you don't mind, maybe sharing a little bit of your story, I think if you feel
okay.
comfortable doing so. I mean,
Sure.
or
Uh,
anybody. I'm always interested to hear other people's stories and see where they are and how they cope.
yeah. My story. I was married to my husband for 33 years. For the last 14 years, he had developed an early onset dementia. So it was just a very long process of losing him, very long process of grieving and not grieving. It's like he was there, but he wasn't the person, he wasn't the whole person that I loved. Not that I loved the,
You lose them twice.
yeah, right. It wasn't the personality that I loved less, but it was exhausting. And finally having to, I thought at one point that, well, at least if I have to, um, have him put in a memory care facility, if I couldn't take care of him anymore, I would at least do it once he maybe didn't know me anymore or something. And it's just because of his type of dementia, he was having personality changes and such. And he's really becoming a safety issue to himself and to me. Um, but yeah, letting him go, having him go to a facility was really hard. And I thought if I could just recover for a few weeks, I initially took him there for respite care. Um, so, the 2 weeks came and went, and I was still sitting on the couch, just unable to move. Um, so we did it for another week and was still on the couch. And thankfully, the nurse coordinator said that, maybe it's just time to make this permanent. And, obviously, you can always change. So, um, yeah, so I did that. Um, and then there's the whole issue of dealing with different facilities and how they're run. And um, you know, was kicked out of one and then not accepted at another. And, just trying to find a good match. And fortunately, I did. I found a wonderful place for him to stay. It was at least 30 miles from where I lived. So it was a lot going back and forth. But yeah, I guess it's acceptance at that point that, you can only do what you can do. Um, but yeah, it's been 12 years since he's passed now, but I think I'm now trying to downsize my house and move on, and I'm feeling the twinges again coming up that, oh, maybe this is why I'm not moving, because this is where we were last. And I live out in the country, so I scattered his ashes here, which is fine. I don't feel that like I'm leaving him by leaving the property.
You just don't want to leave.
Certainly. Yeah, I think, it's just maybe finalizing that.
Chapter.
I don't know. Maybe that's, I'm not sure. It's a little intangible for me, and that's maybe why I'm struggling a bit here, but it's good to talk about it. And I think your cue about journaling, perhaps I need to do that more, because that's helped me in the past, and I've been hesitant to do that. So that's probably what I need to do.
It really is first of all, thank you for sharing the story, and I'm sorry for your loss.
Well, thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
And the journaling is really a self reflection of where we are emotionally in our journey. Can be really powerful. But and you talked about downsizing and getting ready to sell your house, or working in that path. I'm also trying to do the same thing. My kids are older. I'm trying to get an empty nest, and move into a smaller place, because I don't need this large of a house. But at the same time, I'm feeling those same kinds of, we had so many memories here.
Mhm.
And it does feel like another loss.
Yeah.
And so I may take my own advice on this one, and journal through my feelings on that as well, because I've found when I actually put pen to paper, not typing it on a keyboard, because it for me it's very tactile, to get it out of my mind and out into the open. Um, I find that when I do that, I can start making some sense out of where my brain is going, because sometimes it's scattered a little bit because I've got so many things going on. But if I can focus on my writing, and focus on what I'm feeling in the moment, and how those all tie to the events that are happening, has been very powerful for me too.
I'll do it.
And I no, never mind. I'm not gonna do a shameless plug. Sorry. I know I'm supposed to every time I get into one of these conversations, but that's just not me.
Carrie, you have your hand raised.
I figured out how to do that, but I forgot to unmute myself. So I appreciate this meeting. And I love your plant. My ex just moved to Florida, and he gave me his plant, which I thought was much smaller, and it's hitting the ceiling. So I feel like we have a bond there, if that makes any sense. I lost my brother, who I was very close with. It was 2.5 years ago, and I'm still grieving. And I have been hurt by people that were not there for me, especially one very dear friend. And her thing is, your brother wouldn't want you to be like this. And we went out to lunch. I guess it was last September, and she said to me, I need to tell you something. You're a Debbie Downer. And that hurt so much. And there was another mutual friend. We were teachers. And I said, you mean like Joanne? And she said, yeah. And so I've he was in VNS. He got 3 to 6 months, which I knew, but I never, let it in I didn't realize it was going to happen. And Terry was very brave, and he died in 4 months. So that was a shock. And I was totally in shock. I had a lot of guilt. I think there's a lot of guilt in death. Like, what else could you do? He lived in Manhattan. I live in Long Island and Long Beach. But I did spend like two months caring for him. And he had a wonderful support from VNS. It was totally different than my mom, whose anniversary of her death, ironically, is Monday, the 7th, and it's going to be 30 years. But that death, all deaths are different, and how
Right.
you mourn them are different. And I thought I could never live without my mom, but I had 2 children, to take care of, and a husband. But this loss is just, it's still, I wouldn't say consumes me, because it's not like we live together like a spouse, but it's also the end of my family, because my mom's gone, my other brother, who I wasn't really close with, and just that history of your childhood and your memories is not there. And
Mm-hmm.
recently, my best friend's sister died kind of suddenly, although she did have some dementia and some breathing problems, but she went in the hospital on Wednesday and died Friday. So that was kind of, it was a shock. And Josephine, my best friend, asked me to go through some pictures. And of course, then I find ones with my brother, although I have a lot of pictures around of him, not since he died, but always, because we were that close. But one picture popped up of me as a 4-year-old flower girl. We grew up in the city for neighbors. And my immediate thought was, I'm going to send this to Terry. And then I started to cry, And so those triggers or things do happen. But how am I handling this? I'm in grief groups. There's a wonderful sibling group. I don't think I would have been okay if I hadn't had that sibling group. And I'm still in it. It's once a month. And because people understand that loss, that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people don't. And then I'm in a Tuesday night group that has different losses. So, and then I listen, like this, and I don't feel you should be over it. There is no time limit. And I do journal. I write all the time. I've done that all my life. And actually, I did write when I was taking care of him. And sometimes I'll reread them. And I was just in shock for like 4 months. I couldn't say his name without crying. So thank you for this today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for sharing, and my condolences for your loss. I actually lost my sister um, a little over 2 years ago. She had been dealing with an ependymoma in her spinal column. It was a very rare cancer in her spinal column that was inoperable um, for about 10 years. And at one point, they told her she couldn't walk, or she'd never be able to walk, and she proved them wrong. And we went dancing a few years before she passed away. Um, and I was very fortunate to be there about a month before she passed away, because she's lived in California and I live in Massachusetts. Um, but a sibling loss is very different, a very different loss. And just as a resource for you, I recently came across this book. I shared it on my social medias yesterday. It's called Always a Sibling, and it's uh, the Forgotten Mourner's Guide to Grief. And the author, um, I posted about it yesterday because it was the 15th anniversary of her brother's death. He served in Operation Enduring Freedom and was killed overseas. But the book is really interesting because there's a lot of different studies, and it's not a dry academic book. It's sibling. It talked about different sibling types of relationships and the different kind of grief that we go through as siblings, and that we spend most of our time, even with parents in the house, with our siblings. And so that forms a specific bond that once we lose a sibling, it makes it a little harder to uh, to break that bond, um, for lack of a better term, because she's a lot more articulate than I am. But it it's interesting because it's got a lot of personal stories interwoven in with the scientific information. So she talks about a certain type of grief process or relationship, and then she shares stories of other people, how they had those relationships with their siblings. So I recommended it to my followers yesterday. Um, I really enjoyed that book, and it really helped me to put in perspective that sibling relationship. Because also with my brother, I haven't really talked to him in years. We don't really get along, so I understand and those different dynamics of the relationships that with siblings, and it was just really very helpful to me. So you might take a look at and see if you can find a copy of that. It might help.
Thank you.
You.
What is the author? Who is
Oh,
the
the author is Annie, Annie. Oh, actually, here, let me.
I can't see it there.
Yeah, it's okay. It's Annie Sclaver. It's Sklaver Orenstein.
Oops.
Orenstein.
Thank you. And where do you have your is it a podcast or where can
Um,
I find you?
for my stuff, I posting videos on YouTube and TikTok, on Facebook and Instagram. Those are all at Life After Losses, one word, losses plural, or lifeafterlosses.com. You can sign up there, and I email the weekly blog
Thank you.
on Sundays. You're welcome.
And so, yeah, and I do plan on I actually have more of these talks with different authors scheduled for the rest of the month. So whenever I have them come out, I'll send them to you, James, and then you can send them out if you want.
Oh, I'm
Because I'm not sure who comes from where.
I am absolutely happy to share any of this information with anybody, because I think it is important that we talk about grief and we talk about the okay of being in grief and
Yes,
having grief and being able to mourn in the way that makes sense to us individually, because our individual processes are as unique as the relationships that we had. Like I had mentioned earlier, the fact that it took me 2 years to start dating and it took somebody else 6 months, 6 weeks, doesn't speak to our love for the person that we lost. It doesn't speak to anything about us other than how we processed through our grief.
and some people process quicker than others.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a race. Life isn't a race, right? I mean, it's the destination that it's getting to that destination that makes
It's the
sense.
journey.
That's the journey. Thank you. Yes, the journey.
It was coming to me.
Well, it's
uh, if you want, what are the names of the two books you've written?
well, actually, I've done three. So the
Oh,
first one is called
three.
Life After Losses. That is a memoir. So that one is really all about me, and it's all about my two losses. And then I have a second one called Moving Past Grief. That is more stories and strategies that still includes a lot of my personal experience, in how I process through various stages. And then the last one is the Grief Recovery for Adults. That's right here. That is a more comprehensive guide that uh, it's kind of got like plug and play modules. So, for example, we talked about finding your tribe, finding the people who can support you. And so that lists of different kinds of support that's available, what fits your mood, what fits your style, what fits your personality, so that you can find the right kind of resources to be able to do that. And then also in that book, since you asked, I introduced this thing called the purpose framework, and it's PURPOS. So, and each chapter is one of those letters. So P is perceive reality, U is unpack your emotional baggage, and so there are specific journal prompts within that book for each of those topics. It's not linear because grief isn't linear. So you pick and choose where you want to focus on any particular day, and there's some prompts on there to help you work through what you're feeling.
We're almost at an hour, so doesn't feel like it, but
It doesn't.
is there anything else you would like to
Not from me,
add or close with?
but if is there anybody else that wants to share or ask a question? Doesn't look like it.
It's
Okay.
silence.
No, yeah,
That's okay though.
nothing
Okay to have
specific
that.
to
Like it's
close it
okay to
off. I
have
mean,
grief.
we talked about the importance and or at least what I feel is important to talk about our grief, to talk about our loved ones. It reminds me of that movie Coco from Disney, right? If you
Oh,
don't
I do like
talk
that movie.
about if you don't talk about those who have passed, the memory gets lost. And I want to live with the memories and bring those forward.
Anne, you have a question or statement?
Yeah. Yeah, I know a little bit about you, Dawn, but can you speak as to, why you're doing this and your background and
Great question.
Well, I've been a hospice nurse for coming up on 4 years. Um, I have had my own losses in life. I lost my dad coming up on 9.5 years ago, and grandparents and friends and stuff. And I just, working hospice, I come to realize grief is something that nobody wants to talk about. Death is something nobody wants to talk about. And I'm tired of seeing people suffer in silence. I'm tired of people suffering by themselves. So I just want to get it out there that anyone, you know, it's okay to do what you're doing, but you don't have to be alone. So, so I decided to get into this. And I'm one of those few people that can talk about death, and it doesn't bother me like it does a lot of people. I mean, I have feelings. I'm not cold-hearted, but I don't shy away from it.
And one of the things I found when I started writing is, doing a memoir first. I mean, everything was just memories, 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 and I was just mired in it. Um, but I've noticed that the more I write about it, the more I talk about it, the lighter I feel in terms of the weight on my shoulders that I can have these conversations most of the time without tears in my eyes. Um,
You're
there
letting
are,
go.
but I can have these conversations and I can still honor the memories of those that I've lost while helping somebody else with their loss. And like I said, I'm talking about my loved ones all the time, so they won't be forgotten as long as I'm around.
You learn how to let go of the
Well,
grief. Well,
the,
the shame and
learn
all
to
the
let
things going
go,
around.
but you learn to live with.
Yes.
And I've shared other areas that I used to consider the grief this like this big ominous cloud that was just this monster that it was over me, and now it's more of a shadow companion. It's something I can put in my pocket and pull out every now and again, or I can sit it on a shelf and say, okay, today, tomorrow I'm going to do this. Tomorrow I'm going to pull that little thing off of and honor a memory. But I don't have to live with that weight every day.
Well, thank you everyone for coming.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for sharing as well. And Dawn, thank you for reaching out.
And maybe at some point we'll do this again.
I would love to. This is a great conversation. And I think it's an important conversation.
Yes, I do too. So I will end this now and stop the recording, and thank you guys.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.